and a large welcome for joining this session. I want to start by thanking you also for taking this topic of sustainability really serious, for participating, for having the curiosity to also listen to one perspective. I also want to thank the team from the Economic Times for, of course, inviting me and allowing me to share what I believe is one of the most important topics of our current time. My name is Thomas Udesen. I'm the CPO of the German-based life science company Bayer, but I'm also the co-founder of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge that I'll be sharing you a little bit more about later today. My objective is really to explain why I believe that this is very, very critical, and that you will see that the world that we are having in terms of business to business is undergoing a massive change, where collaboration and doing things differently becomes centerpiece. I hope at the end of the next couple of minutes you will agree with me. So the topic of sustainability is very, very large. And just to calibrate everybody, when I talk about sustainability and sustainable procurement, it does include both people, planet, and profit. So that means it includes all the social dimensions of how do we reduce inequality, how do we have an inclusive economy, the environmental dimension of how do we then also make sure that our activities benefit the biodiversity as on our planet, and of course also the economic dimension, the profit dimension. There is no doubt that the topic is moving very, very fast. There is certainly a lot of traction in the last couple of years. More and more companies are seeing the criticality of this, which is very, very good. But we also do see that there is still a large part of our supply chains that hasn't really understood how critical this is for the long-term success of the company. So with that, I hope I can inspire you. I hope you can trigger some conversations in your companies, maybe with your friends, with your family, on how can we also prepare ourselves for a better future. Now, if we start with the facts, I think it's very, very clear. The science have clearly determined that we as humanity are currently living outside of the planetary boundaries. And that's really on all the dimensions that we see, whether it is the loss of biodiversity, whether it's on the oceans, where we see impacts from overfishing, soil, it has issues with soil degradation, the forest, when we see deforestation, and of course around climate change, where many governments have signed up to the Paris Agreement, where we are all aiming to stay within the increase of temperature of 1.5 degrees. The root cause for a lot of the challenges we are now having to deal with are also the fact that we are increasing our world populations. We see a reduction in the arable land that is available. And of course, that really is the core of our challenge as humans. How do we make sure that we feed our growing population? How do we make sure that it's done in a sustainable and an affordable manner? We have seen the impacts of the challenge very much in the last couple of years. Climate, we've seen 2020, for example, the fires started in Australia. We've had hurricanes, we see floods, and also quite disturbing statistics when it comes to the ice caps at the poles. So there is enough sort of statistics that we would be able to worry about. But we also see some humanitarian challenges. Tonight, approximately 650 million people on the planet will go to bed hungry. It means that even in today's system, we are incapable of making sure that everybody has access to the right number of calories. And we see also consequences with this, things like mass migration. We have seen also that the COVID has, of course, been part of our life in the last couple of years. And there are also scientists who argue that that's also a consequence of us reducing the space where animals are able to live their lives. Geopolitical implications have also been part of our life, particularly in supply chains the last year plus. Things like protectionism, trade wars. We see more challenges when it comes to border crossings and land disputes. So So there are some very, very tangible challenges that we have to deal with, particularly in supply chains. I think 2020 also was, of course, a year that offers us a chance to maybe reflect. I think it was in many ways both humbling, but also very, very painful. I believe that when it comes to the learnings, this is really critical that we capture those. And I think one of the most important learnings for supply chains was that a sustainable supply chain is also a resilient supply chain. And it was also very clear that the companies who have been investing in relationships across their supply network, where they have introduced sustainable practices, they have aligned their expectations towards their partners. Those were the companies that also weathered the COVID storms with least headaches, least disruptions. And I think that's a very important lesson that also we need to now carry with us, that in fact we were wrong on quite a few topics. Also, when it comes to how we work, a lot of the common beliefs around how do we travel, how do we work, sitting in the offices, has really been challenged greatly. We've seen that a lot of things are absolutely possible in different ways. And I think those are important lessons that we absolutely need to also carry with us into 21 plus. And I think it's also important that we recognize the role of technology. I mean, imagine what would have happened 10 years ago if we had had the same challenges. So the role of technology is very, very critical, and also making sure that maybe it's to uncover some of the other areas where we were not really right in some of our underlying assumptions. So whilst every company has, of course, very unique challenges and unique businesses and unique markets that they operate in, I think one of the very, very universal challenges is this big decisions that companies now need to make. And that is, will we be sharing our shareholders exclusively from a financial perspective moving forward? Or are we now starting to merge more, let's say, sustainability, social aspects into our role as companies? And what is very, very comforting is to see that there's clearly a trend moving from financials only towards more integrated approaches. The more, let's say, maybe defensive, a corporate contributor, we do what the regulators tell us to do and make sure that we stay just above the minimum requirement, towards impact generators, where you really see the topic of sustainability as a means to transform how you operate your business, towards social innovators, where it's really also the purpose of the organization to make sure that it is that harmony between the environment, the social dimension, of course, also the economic dimension. Clearly, trend is going right, so that's promising. What is also promising and quite helpful is that the language across all the different organizations is changing to center around the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And that is, of course, very, very helpful, because as the regulators are starting to have a much stronger role in this here, as the investors are starting to also show different interests, of course, as talent is also starting to ask questions, it's important that we have centered around this common language with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So I consider myself privileged. I work for a company that actually gets this. I work for Bayer. Our purpose is science for a better life, and the vision is health for all and hunger for none. So our prime objective is to really work at that challenge. How do we keep today's 7.8 billion people healthy? How do we make sure that they are fed in a sustainable way? And then if you think about what's ahead of us, the projections around our world population, 10 billion people by 2050, but that needs to be embedded into everything that we do as a company. We have 3 divisions. I think you're familiar with crop science, we have a pharmaceutical business, and we have a consumer health business. And they are, of course, making sure that everything we do in our product portfolio and how we engage in our communities captures those aspects of being a very good leading corporate citizen. But also, we need to make sure that the whole organization has an integrated strategy, and that really includes a sustainability that you see here with the red circle. And for us, it's not enough to talk about it. It's really making sure that we also walk the talk. And one of the latest commitments we have made is around Science-Based Targets Initiative, where we have also committed to reducing both our internal, so the CO2 footprint, which is called Scope 1 and 2, as well as our external. And we have also decided that we go for the bold scenario to stay within 1.5 degrees of increase, which in fact does mean that for Scope 1 and 2, we have to reduce our CO2 emissions by 42% in real terms before anybody talks about possibly topping up with alternative means for that. Many of you are probably aware that internal Scope 1 and 2 is how do we operate, how do we make sure that our energy is renewables, how do we make sure that we reduce travel, that we optimize our fleet, while Scope 3 is really working with our supply chain, making sure that all the suppliers are also reducing their carbon emissions. And for many manufacturing companies like Bayer, we are really seeing the much biggest impact in the Scope 3. So typically it's 80% plus that is in Scope 3. But getting to the even ability of committing to science-based targets has to be recognized as a long journey. I mean, these things do not just happen overnight. And we were one of the first companies that signed up for the United Nations Global Compact in year 2000. And since then, of course, we have worked on all the different topics as and when they became more known, and when also we started realizing that there are different ways of doing that. And one example is very relevant also for India is, of course, we are in a crop science business. We work with many growers, many smallholders, and already in 2005, we formalized a program in India that was really the childcare program that wanted to make sure that all our partners, all the growers, the smallholders, that they have access to information, that we engage with the local communities to make sure that the children of the growers was also going to school rather than activated in the farms. 2011, so 10 years ago, we also recognized that a lot of these challenges are really united across companies. We need to collaborate with our industry. So we founded 2 industry initiatives, Together for Sustainability, which is on the chemical side, as well as the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, which is on the RX, so on the pharma side. And both of these organizations in the last 10 years have grown tremendously. And the 6 founding companies of Together for Sustainability has now grown to 31 companies with a total sales in excess of 300 billion. So really sizable ways of collaborating across our supply chain. We have in the period 16-18 worked with different topics. There's been the whole topic around palm oil. There's been the topics around conflict minerals. And in 2019, also after we completed the acquisition and the integration of Monsanto, we looked at what are the best practices that we can see across both organizations. We relaunched our supplier code of conduct, which is of course available on the internet, which is really a leading expectation towards our supply chain. In 2020, we signed up with the science-based targets, one of the first organizations to do that, also in the scenario of 1.5 degrees. But we did more than that. We also made sure that the whole compensation system in our organization, all the bonuses of our staff, is dependent on whether we are delivering on our sustainability commitments or not. So it's not enough just talking about it, it has to happen. And that's the roadmap towards 2030. We are now converting all our energy to renewables, country by country, making sure that, again, our Scope 1, 2, and our Scope 3 emissions is also going down. So the challenge I think we all have ahead of us, sustainability, of course, means that we all have to collaborate in different ways. And to change the system, there's really sort of 3 buckets of players that absolutely need to make sure that we are connected. And And one of those sort of starting points is, of course, the innovators. We need to make sure that there are clever people who find solutions on increasing bio-based, making sure that we introduce circular economies, that we also reduce our dependency on fossil fuel. So the innovators, the people who find solutions, are very critical. Of course, needs to be supported in making sure that they find solutions to our big problems. But the regulators are also really, really important, that they create a level playing field and they create an environment where good behaviors are being rewarded and undesired behaviors are also, being taxed in one way or the other, or reduced in terms of their potential use. And of course, here there are many activities, whether it's under the umbrella of United Nations or the G20s, or each country's government are now starting to look at, what is our role to make sure that we also create that right framework. The NGO community is super important. Academia is super important, making sure that we also have the right knowledge. But none of this is really going to change how we operate unless we activate the markets and that the demand is being created. And it starts with every one of you, me, in how do we buy things as an individual, but equally so, how do we then buy things as professionals, and making sure that when our suppliers come with great innovative solutions that are reducing the carbon footprint or the environmental footprint, that we make sure that we create that demand. Consider topics in collaboration, multi-party associations like the RSPO. Look at how has the trade been conducted, the fair trade, and how do we partner with industry players in new ways without breaking any of the antitrust regulations that, of course, we want to make sure. So that system needs to be activated, and it calls for a different way of looking at partnerships across the whole value chain. And when not everybody is enjoying the status and what I'm experiencing, that I'm working for a company that gets it. We have now launched the Sustainable Procurement Pledge to really offer a platform for people who can also then make a stand as a procurement professional individually, to say there are certain principles that I want to stand for. And the pledge was really launched 18 months ago, because whilst there's 15,000 companies who have signed up for the United Nations Global Compact, when we speak to procurement people, and there are many sitting in your organization, more than 50% are admitting that we are not doing enough. There's no way that we will be able to meet these UN SDGs by 2030 if we don't change our practices. And that's really how we decided to activate this community of 1 million procurement professionals that are largely controlling the world trade, which in business to business. It's estimated to be around 8.3 trillion. So it's, of course, very, very significant. Our belief is that most of the ambassadors, 1 million people who are sitting on the front line, really require two major things. They require the knowledge, competence building, but they also need to make sure that they have a mandate. They need the leaders in their organizations to give them the support to actually progress on this. And that's what we have set out to do. The ambassadors follow the 5 principles. We stand up for people and our planet. And we believe that the way of changing the world is by doing it together. And we don't wait for somebody else to solve our problem. We start with ourselves. We recognize each and one of us have a big role to play. It's about sharing knowledge. It's about listening to other opinions, also being open to that. And of course, making sure that we leave the right legacy of procurement, supply chains, making sure that when we have that conversation in 20 years from now, we have gone beyond 2030, and maybe our grandchildren are looking at us saying, did you do what was necessary to avoid this looming climate disaster, which we have all heard about? And here we believe it's important that the clear answer is yes, we did what we had to do. With that, I want to remind all the procurement people, but it's also relevant for all our supply chain colleagues, that actually it's more than a job. What we do, it's gone beyond that. It is clear that if we want to fix the world, we need to fix our supply chains. And here we are, as procurement, really well positioned to make sure that that interaction between the different supply chain partners is being raised to the highest level. Impact starts with an I, and with that, we also believe that procurement has really grown to be much more than a job. It's actually a responsibility. I want to thank you for listening in. If you are interested in learning more about also the pledge, you can check out spp.earth. Join us on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me if you have any specific questions. I hope that I could give you some food for thought, and would certainly love to hear from you if that has triggered anything. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for making sure that the topic of sustainability is front and center, and that it is a priority in the decade of action.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you so much for sharing those, I would say, thoughts that in a way are paving for leadership lessons for all of us. As you'd mentioned, impact starts with I, or for that matter, that any kind of way to fix the world all begins with we as individuals. So I believe that's an interesting pledge for all of us to take a look at. And I'm going to urge our members of the audience to please do connect with Thomas or the entire team, be it on LinkedIn or right across. You can write to them and gather more details on this program. With that, let's move forward. Now it's time for our next session as well. In fact, it's time to bring on board our next speaker for another interesting keynote address around strategies for overcoming challenges and identifying opportunities to support a new future for trade. We have with us Nancy Emmert, Director, Trade Innovation Lab, CGI, who will be sharing her thoughts around these interesting strategies that we're all looking forward to. So we'll get the session started in just a couple of seconds.